Awesome. Okay, thanks for being available this morning. I am going to have this this up online as well afterwards. So I just wanted to go through parabens, and they're one of the ingredients that are the most maligned in the cosmetic industry. Basically, there's a lot of rumours and myths about parabens, and as a result, many manufacturers are basically avoiding them. Now, I'm going to be really upfront with myself. I don't use parabens, but the reason why I don't use them is not because I think there is actually anything wrong with them. The reason why I don't use them is because so many people are brainwashed that they're bad, and to be quite honest, it is too hard to overcome that myth now. Like, people will look at it and they'll go, oh, it's got a paraben in it, we can't use it. Now, I use products with parabens in. I don't have a problem with it because I know that it's a safe ingredient. But I'm going to go through today with the research that is out there. There is a lot of research that apparently isn't shown to people, which, because it's not scaremongering, it doesn't get the publicity that, that everything else does. So, okay, so parabens. Parabens, you usually find them on your bottle under methyl, ethyl, propyl, butyl, or isopropyl paraben or isobutyl paraben. The majority of cosmetics actually have them in. And for those that have now gone to replacing parabens, they're usually replacing it with something like caprylyl glycol or phenoxyethanol. Now, for me, phenoxyethanol is extremely irritating, and that is actually coming out now also too as a major allergen as well. So the alternatives aren't really good. It's really difficult to find a preservative that preserves effectively, but also you're not going to have that sensitivity issue, because that's another problem with the preservatives, because they are known to be one of the biggest allergens. So basically, I just want to put this principle out there, and this was actually from Paracelsus in 1538. All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. Solely the dose determines that a thing is not poison. And I suppose I want to give the example because I'm an ex-nurse. Now, we all need oxygen, but in the air it's at 21%. But if you give someone 100% oxygen, you'll kill them. Now, that's the problem with things like safety data sheets, is that they are 100% concentration. And it gets very misconstrued. Oxygen is safe in an acceptable level, and that's the same reason with preservatives, that they give a percentage that is to be able to use, because in a higher concentration it can be a problem. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. It's the same with water. If you drink too much water, you will actually have an issue with your body. You will actually become sick. So is that to say you shouldn't drink water or you should avoid it? No, everything is in balance, and everything is in moderation. So the preservatives for parabens, they actually do have a maximum concentration. So for your methyl paraben and your ethyl paraben, the most that can actually be used is 0.4%. So it's a very small percentage. And propyl paraben and butyl paraben, the most that is used is 0.19%. Now, in reality, butyl paraben and propyl paraben are often used at 0.07%, so even less than that. So that maximum concentration isn't necessarily what is in a preservative. Now, I just want to point out how low a level of use you actually need to use for parabens, because when you compare that with phenoxyethanol, which is 1%, or you compare that with other preservatives that are out there, like the natural preservatives, you need to use more than 1% quite often, 1.5 to 2%. So with the natural preservatives, you're actually having to use a lot more to actually get the same preservation efficacy. So now a lot of the fear around parabens has come about because of basically ignorance, and a lot of, I suppose, what would you call it, hyping up of a study that was done by Dr. Darbright. So that study was basically flawed. It was completely ignored by the scientific community, but yet it got massive, massive publicity. So leading to the thing that basically parabens are toxic and that they cause breast cancer, which is actually not true. So they'd also want you to believe that parabens aren't good for a sensitive skin or an eczema-prone skin because they will cause allergies. And again, this isn't true. So I'm going to go through this today. My list of articles where I've gathered this information from is really, really extensive. I haven't even listed it because it's like 25 or 30 articles where I've got this actually from. So, okay. Okay, so what I'm going to go through, parabens do have direct correlates in nature. So parabens actually exist in nature. So all plants naturally produce what's called p-hydroxybenzoic acid. Now, the reason why I'm telling you about this is because parabens are actually metabolized in the skin and they are converted back down to p-hydroxybenzoic acid, which is what is naturally found in basically plants. So all of the plants that we're actually eating, they have this in here. So the reason why the plants produce it is because it's a defensive against attack by microorganisms. So it stops them from basically being degraded. So this is only a few of the plants that actually contain it. Things like carrot, olives, cucumber, honeysuckle, and ylang-ylang, mangoes, raspberries, and blackberries. Now that's a really small list because there is like way more foods that actually have estrogen-like properties, and so all of those actually contain phytoestrogens. Now you're all familiar with phytoestrogens and the use of those for menopause. So all of them are in fact what you would call an endocrine disruptor because they actually will influence our actual own hormones. So an endocrine disruptor is an exogenous agent that interferes with the production, release, transport, metabolism, or binding action or elimination of natural hormones in the body. So most phytoestrogens show beneficial effects. However, they can, in some instances, also promote tumor growth as well. So with the parabens, the risk-benefit is it's dependent on the actual dose and the circumstances of what they're actually doing, and it's not just about a single chemical. So parabens actually offer substantially less risk than your naturally occurring endocrine chemicals, such as your phytoestrogen, daidzen. So basically, now this is actually from a study. The estrogenic potency of synthetic estrogen chemicals is very limited, and phytoestrogens are far more potent and they trigger more of a biological response that is evoked. So I actually found that really interesting that synthetic chemicals that are actual natural plants and what have you have more of effect with binding to estrogen receptors than actually any chemical actually does, and that was sort of like a bit of an eye-opener for me. So and this is again from another study. The natural endocrine disruptors genistein, coumastrol, and zearalenone stimulate the transcriptional activity of estrogen receptors at considerably lower concentrations, which is 100 times more than synthetics. So again, synthetics are very, very weak with regards to bringing out some estrogenic ability in the skin. So what I want to show to you today that parabens aren't carcinogenic, they don't cause breast cancer, and they're also not mutagenic. So I want to go back to the Darbright study. So I put that in the wrong order. So basically the Darbright study came out and it showed that parabens can be absorbed through the skin and accumulate in breast cancer tissue in their original form. So when I said that before, they are converted down, there's a really, really small percentage that is possibly not, and it's around 1%. So, and in saying that, there's got to be either an exceedingly high dose, or there's got to be the conditions for that to actually occur. So this study, though, the flaws with it were that it did not identify the route by which the parabens entered the body. So if you guys have actually looked at and educated therapists, you'll also see that I put up a big study about parabens in food. Now, we have got far more exposure to parabens through our food than we ever will through cosmetics. So it didn't identify where the parabens actually came from. No data was collected as to whether or not the patients from whom the tumours were excised used personal care products that contained parabens. And the scientists have also proposed that and this is the biggest flaw of the study, is that the parabens were actually present in the tissue samples because of contamination, because they were also detected in the control samples. So the control samples should not have had any parabens in them at all, but they had parabens in there. So basically, for this reason and several other reasons, this study was largely discredited by many cancer research organisations and much of the rest of the scientific community. One of the most frequently quoted facts about parabens is that they mimic estrogen and that they're endocrine disruptors. And that's not true. And I'm going to go through why that is the case and what the definition of an endocrine disruptor is, and why once you actually see that definition, you can see it's not. Now, this slide actually here, there was another big debate about using underarm deodorants and shaving, and the suggestion basically that you know, when you actually shave, that you are exposing yourself, and you're using deodorant, that you're exposing yourself at a higher risk for actually getting breast cancer. Now, the philosophy of this was that the parabens were to be found in the outer quadrant of the breast, and that was the closest to the actual lymph glands, and it's also closest to where you shave. Now, the irony of it is that the lymph nodes in that area don't actually carry to the breast, they carry away. So if there was any toxins, they wouldn't actually go there, they're getting carried away. And the other irony of it is that deodorants don't contain parabens. So, you know, that therein again is another flaw. Generally, deodorants don't contain parabens, so even if you were using a deodorant there, you're not exposing yourself to parabens. And the whole thing of that study was, you know, if there was nicks or whatever, then that's how they're getting in. So a lot of this information is purported by organisations such as Environmental Working Group and Safe Cosmetics, which again, their studies are actually flawed. They're inconsistent. I actually had a look at what they put for parabens, and they've got insufficient data, yet even saying they've got insufficient data, they will still give it a rating which is really high, and I don't see how you can do that when you've got inconsistent data. So, okay, so what is an endocrine disruptor? Now, I gave you the definition before, and it should be down here. Okay. An endocrine disruptor is an exogenous substance or a mixture that alters the function of the endocrine system and consequently can cause adverse health effects in an intact organism. And I've done a typo there, or its progeny or its subpopulations. Now, the thing I want to, and this is actually from REACH, which is actually a scientific body that determines what is an endocrine disruptor. Now, the thing I want to put there is in an intact organism. Parabens have never been found in the human body to cause an adverse health effect. They have not been shown to impact our hormones. Every single study that has been done on a rat, and we aren't rats, or it's been done in a petri dish, which isn't an intact organism. So again, that's the definition. So when I go through this, you'll actually see that by the definition, they actually are not endocrine disruptors. Yes, they do have a weak ability to mimic estrogen, but mimicking estrogen and having estrogenic activity, as I'll show you later, are completely different. And it's not just semantics that I'm actually saying that there is actually a difference with it, because just because something can bind to something, it's what it does after that makes the difference. So if it does nothing, then there's no influence on it. So I'm going to go through that with you. So the cancer argument is based on the ability of parabens to mimic the hormone estrogen, which is known to play a role in the development of breast cancers. So laboratory research, however, has shown that they would have to be 500 to 10,000 times more potent to do this. And even the strongest estrogen mimetic out of the parabens, butylparaben, is 100,000 times weaker than estrogen. So it's incredibly, incredibly weak. In another study, which was from the Critical Reviews of Toxicology in 2005, they reviewed the estrogenic activity of parabens, and the author concluded that based on maximum daily exposure estimates, it was implausible that parabens could increase the risk associated with exposure to estrogenic chemicals. Methyl and propylparabens have such weak estrogenic activity that no activity was detected in vivo in classical uterotrophic assays using high-dose oral or subcutaneous rodent administration. So what that actually means is, and I want to point out, in vivo is actually for real, in vitro is in a petri dish. So what they've actually done is they've injected the parabens into a uterus, which is the uterotrophic assay, and it had no impact on it. So if something is estrogenic, it should have caused something to happen with that uterus, and it didn't. Again, so a lot of this that is actually being put out there isn't actually correct. They don't have any effect. So that was that study. Butylparaben, which is the one that has had the most interest, showed estrogenic activity 100,000 times weaker than estradiol, which is estrogen. And this has been wrongly interpreted as parabens mimicking estrogen. So estrogenic activity and estrogenic mimicry are very different effects. So estrogenic activity is simply a measure of the power of a substance to bind to the estrogen receptors in the body, so whether or not it can bind to it. It's expressed as a comparative figure to estradiol because that's what they're comparing it with. Once it's bound, it may just sit there and do nothing, or it may mimic estrogen. So that's basically the difference between it. Estrogenic activity and mimicry are different. So activity is when it actually will just bind, and mimicry is actually when it starts to exert a hormonal effect. And basically it hasn't been shown to do that. So there was another study which actually compared all of the parabens and estradiol and the genes that it actually affected, which I've got my slides around the wrong way here. So basically they compared what genes parabens actually had an effect on, and they compared what genes 17B estradiol actually had an effect on. So basically, and the conclusion from it was that the genes, the majority of the genes, were not regulated in the same way. So parabens do not work the same as 17B estradiol. And although parabens can mimic the action of estrogen on the expression of some genes, their mimicry is not perfect across global patterns of gene expression, and differences in gene expressions could result in consequences to the cells which are not identical. So basically what it's saying is they don't work the same way as 17B estradiol, and they don't have the same effect. To say that parabens mimic estrogen and to actually say that they work the same way as 17B estradiol, which is known to drive breast cancer tumours, is not correct, because they don't even work the same way. They don't affect the same genes. And this was a major study which came out, but again there was no publicity of this study. It was not as highlighted as what the Darbre study was. So now there's other studies that have shown, and one of them was done by Oishi, which is O-I-S-H-I, that propylparaben and butylparaben may produce adverse reproductive effects in young male rats when given via the dietary route for 8 weeks. Now, I'm sure you've heard the stories about parabens affecting like males and testosterone levels and all of that, and that's why we've got so many problems with reproduction. And this is basically where they've come from with that, because there's certainly no evidence of that in the adult male population. So basically this study that they did on the rats showed lower sperm count and other changes. However, when that study was actually put through to be peer reviewed, they actually said that there was data that was lacking, and they wanted further studies done on it. And ironically, the actual author of that study didn't do any further studies. They also then tried to duplicate those results. So they tried to reproduce them, and it failed. They couldn't reproduce those same results. So even though they used the same protocol and the same rat strain. So for something to be valid, it needs to be reproducible. If someone does a study, someone else should be able to replicate that study using the same conditions and same parameters and be able to get a similar result than what they've actually that they've got in the original study. And basically with this study, they couldn't actually do it. Now there was another study that injected again into our poor little mouse, and they injected propylparaben and butylparaben. Now this was subcutaneously, so it's not a way that we would actually derive parabens in our cosmetics, because we don't inject them into ourselves. And so they injected it into a pregnant mouse who was 1 to 4 days pregnant, and they injected it up to 35 milligrams per mouse per day. Now, I want to point out that that's an exceedingly high dose of parabens to be injecting, and so that's what they actually did with it. And basically, the study showed that there were absolutely no adverse effects with it. So, ironically, 17B estradiol, which is what we're comparing your parabens with, terminated the pregnancy. So parabens had no effect, and your estrogen, when it was injected, terminated the pregnancy. So again, you're looking at the difference between the weakness of parabens and their effect on anything versus actual estrogen itself. So that was that study. There was another study which examined systemic exposure to parabens after oral, topical and subcutaneous administration, and the results of that study were it said that our results suggest that the topical use of parabens does not produce a significant systemic exposure to the parent compounds, but to a metabolite which is paraminobenzoic acid, which is non-toxic, ubiquitous in human nutrition, and an essential and natural constituent of plant and mammalian organisms, and possesses no or negligible estrogenic activity. So with your paraminobenzoic acid, what they found there is that it possesses no estrogenic or negligible estrogenic activity. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because that is what it is metabolized in our skin down to. So it's actually metabolized in human skin down to paraminobenzoic acid, and that has actual no estrogenic activity. So there is no possible way that parabens can cause cancer. Another study, which you'll be glad to know, is actually done on humans for a change, instead of the little rats. I'm just checking no one's hands are up. Awesome. And that actually involved the use of 2% butylparaben. Now, your normal concentration is around 0.02%. So normal cosmetics, we're using a concentration of butylparaben in this test, which is 100 times more than what you would normally be exposed to with your cosmetic use. And the reason why they did that was to try to mimic what long-term exposure would do to actually, butylparaben. So researchers then measured the concentration of various reproductive hormones, thyroid hormones, and other hormones, and they concluded that the concentrations achieved did not affect hormone levels. So butylparaben does not affect the reproductive and thyroid hormones. Butylparaben does not accumulate in the body at all. It doesn't accumulate at all, and it's actually excreted in the urine completely intact. So again, coming back to this actual definition of endocrine disruptors, if we go back to that, an endocrine disruptor has to affect the endocrine system and have an adverse effect. So this study that was done on humans actually showed that it had absolutely no effect on your reproductive or thyroid or any other hormone in the body. So there is no way it can be classed as an endocrine disruptor because it doesn't actually do anything. So I'm just trying to point that out so you can actually get the links to what I'm actually saying. So now the next thing is about sensitivity, because this is the other biggest thing that they actually say. They say parabens are bad, that they shouldn't be used on an intact skin, and that they cause problems. Now, can I tell you that for eczema sufferers particularly, they have a lot of issues with trying to find something that doesn't cause a problem. And I used to use parabens originally, and I've changed it. And do you know how much trouble I had finding a preservative that was not going to irritate their skin? It is incredibly difficult because the parabens don't cause any problem. And in fact, phenoxyethanol causes a hell of a lot more problems with sensitive skins than anything else that I've actually ever encountered. Your phenoxyethanol is often in your sunscreens. For those of you who get itchy eyes or burning eyes, I can guarantee you it will be the phenoxyethanol that is actually causing it. So as far as parabens causing allergies, they don't. There has been contact sensitization when parabens have been applied to damaged or broken skin. But okay, wait for this. That's with using concentrations. Now, this was a study of 15% before they elicited a reaction. So they were using parabens at a concentration of 15%. It took 15% parabens to actually get any reaction from the skin. Now, parabens aren't used at more than 0.4% or 0.2, depending on which paraben it actually is. So that is not an occurrence that ever occurs in any cosmetic. So if it takes 15% parabens to cause an allergy, then it's not causing an allergy at the normal concentration that's actually used. So yeah, it doesn't occur in cosmetic use. So and according to the American Academy of Dermatology, and this was in 2002, the best preservatives for sensitive skin are those containing parabens. You are less likely to have a reaction from them than any other preservative on the market. They're used in cosmetics because they've shown to be very effective, they're stable under heat, and the majority of consumers don't have an allergy to them. So, yeah. So, now the latest research, which came out in 2010, was actually really interesting, and it actually provoked a re-evaluation from the scientific community of the safety of parabens. So the Scandinavian Society of Cosmetic Chemists, they actually held a conference in Sweden in 2009, and Florian Schalouf, I probably pronounced his name wrong, from Calipa, which is an independent organisation, presented the findings of a study that he had actually done on rats. So now this study was actually performed at the request of the scientific community on consumer safety. So they are the ones that actually sit down and actually work out whether a cosmetic is safe, what percentage it is safe at, and then they give the recommendations. So that's actually what we actually follow when we formulate cosmetics, is what their advice and what their guidance actually says. So basically, and this research was done following the claim that that parabens may affect the reproductive and hormonal systems of the body. So according to Schalouf, butylparaben is largely metabolized before entering the systemic circulation, and only trace amounts of this substance are present in the bloodstream after topical application. So this research refuted claims that parabens absorb into the skin and accumulate in the body, possibly causing cancer. And his research also drums up support for the safety of parabens as an effective preservative. So parabens, or 4-hydroxybenzoic acid, are present in all living cells in our bodies, and it's actually an essential component of the respiratory process, and life on Earth would not exist without this compound. So it's actually naturally there. So the study that he did showed that parabens are well absorbed after oral administration, because we do have it in our foodstuff, but only partially absorbed after dermal exposure. So in addition, the compounds are fully metabolized before they enter the bloodstream, and blood plasma tests highlighted only the presence of the paraben metabolite p-hydroxybenzoic acid, and no concentration of the parabens themselves. So what they actually found was the metabolite, p-hydroxybenzoic acid, and if you remember before when I actually said that that was actually shown to have no estrogenic effects. So that's all they're finding. That's actually what exists in nature as well. So yeah, it basically refuted all these other studies that were actually done. So that's why it caused a reevaluation of what was happening. So, and as I said, p-hydroxybenzoic acid does not have any estrogenic effects, and it's found widely in plants and human foods. So being exposed to it actually poses no health risk. And the study confirmed the results of a number of research studies which concluded that parabens are metabolized rapidly and to a large extent in living organisms and can't affect any adverse effects. So in his conclusion for that study, he basically he said that they're safe. That's pretty much what he said. So there's never been any need to panic. Much of the concern has spread over their uses based mainly on the claim to have detected them in human breast cancer tissue. And like I said, that study's been widely ridiculed in the scientific community as the results were wrongly interpreted, and it's not conclusive at all. And they still haven't been able to prove in any shape or form that it's been a problem. So now I just want to go through to here because I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics or Environmental Working Group. So they actually have their website where they actually go through different ingredients and they will list them according to a hazard. From my perspective and from a scientific perspective, if you ask any chemist, they will basically dismiss anything these organisations say because it isn't actually based on current research. A lot of it is scaremongering. One of the biggest ones was the lead in cosmetics, which I'm not going to go into in this because we actually get more lead out of our water drinking than we could ever possibly get from a lipstick. But yeah, they basically will state, that parabens should be avoided. A lot of people are going onto their website and basically getting scared, and it's not based on fact. The FDA, which you will be aware of for the US, supports the use of parabens, and so does the European Union. And the European Union found no correlation between parabens and cancer either. So the cosmetics safety regulations are not mad scientists who are out to kill people. They actually thoroughly review ingredients before they're actually released onto the market. And parabens have been around for over 80 years. And, I actually worry more about the newer preservatives that are out there because they haven't ever had such a long history of use. Especially the natural ones, just because something's natural doesn't mean it's inert or it's not going to have a negative effect in any shape or form. So there was another study too done by Life Sciences Research Office, and that was for the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. And again, they looked at the carcinogenicity, the teratogenicity, which is the ability of it to cause birth defects, and mutagenicity. And they found that there's no short-term toxicological consequences in man and no long-term toxicological consequences in rats. And that was with amounts that greatly exceeded what was normally consumed in a diet. So, yeah. Basically, that's it. Has anyone got any questions? If you do, pop them in the chat box. I will actually upload some of these notes later today. So that you've actually got a copy of what I've actually written. No questions? Just checking. No. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And have a good evening. So it's daytime for me here. Bye.